December 19th, 1777. The drums beat a slow, mournful rhythm, not of triumph, but of weary resignation. Through the biting wind and early snow, a phantom army, a ragged procession of tattered uniforms and broken spirits, trudges into a place that would forever be etched into the soul of a nascent nation. Valley Forge. They are the Continental Army, the last desperate hope for American independence, and they are marching directly into the jaws of hell. How could men endure the unimaginable? How could an army, starving, shoeless and ravaged by disease, not simply cease to exist? This winter, this desolate valley in Pennsylvania became the crucible where the fate of the American Revolution hung by the thinnest thread. What force, what sheer indomitable will could take a collection of shivering, demoralized men and forge them into a disciplined fighting machine? This is the story of that winter. This is the winter of despair. The year 1777 had been a brutal, crushing blow to the American cause. General George Washington's forces had suffered devastating defeats. September brought the Battle of Brandywine, a tactical loss that opened the gates to Philadelphia. 5 days later, a storm saved Washington's army from another British assault. Then came the Paoli massacre, a brutal bayonet charge against sleeping American troops, leaving an indelible scar of terror. Finally, in early October, the ambitious but ultimately failed Battle of Germantown saw the capital, Philadelphia, fall decisively into British hands. The grand dream of liberty seemed to be crumbling. With the British comfortably settled in the rebel capital, Washington faced an agonizing choice: where to quarter his beleaguered army for the winter. He needed a strategic location, close enough to monitor the enemy, yet defensible. On December 19, 1777, his army, numbering approximately 12,000 men, shuffled into Valley Forge. It was meant to be a haven, a place to regroup. Instead, it became a nightmare. Imagine, if you can, the scene. The landscape barren and unforgiving. The soldiers, exhausted from months of campaigning, now faced the daunting task of building their own shelters in the freezing wilderness. They were ordered to construct 14 by 16-foot log huts, but tools were scarce, and the bitter cold already set in. Many began with only canvas tents, offering meager protection against the elements. The numbers tell a horrifying tale. On December 23, just 4 days after their arrival, Washington reported to Congress that a staggering 2,898 men were unfit for duty due to their lack of proper clothing. A third of the entire army lacked viable footwear, their bare feet leaving bloody tracks in the snow and frozen mud. General Anthony Wayne, a fiercely dedicated officer, lamented that the whole army is sick and crawling with vermin. But it wasn't just the cold and the lack of shoes that threatened to break them. It was hunger. The supply lines, already fragile and mismanaged, utterly collapsed. Washington himself wrote to Governor Clinton of New York, "For some days past there has been little less than a famine in camp. A part of the army has been a week without any kind of flesh, and the rest for 3 or 4 days. Over 1,500 horses essential for transport starved to death. The soldiers were reduced to eating fire cake, a thin, unappetizing mixture of flour and water cooked over an open fire. Disease, the silent killer, swept through the crowded, unsanitary encampment. Typhus, typhoid fever, dysentery, and pneumonia ran rampant. Smallpox, a scourge Washington had fought with early inoculations, reappeared. The primitive brigade hospitals were overwhelmed. By the time the army departed 6 months later, an estimated 1,700 to 2,000 men had perished, mostly from illness and exposure. Some estimates even pushed this tragic toll to 3,000. Valley Forge became the deadliest encampment of the entire war, claiming more lives than many major battles combined. Naked and starving as they are, Washington wrote with profound admiration, we cannot enough admire the incomparable patience and fidelity of the soldiery, that they have not been ere this excited by their sufferings to a general mutiny or dispersion. The spirit of desertion, however, rose to a threatening height in February 1778. How much more could these men endure? Their commander, General George Washington, remained a steadfast, unwavering presence. Enduring the same hardships as his men, his leadership crucial in preventing utter collapse. But even his immense will couldn't conjure food or clothing out of thin air. The Continental Army was a skeleton, shivering on the precipice of annihilation. The dream of independence, once a fiery beacon, flickered precariously, threatening to be extinguished forever, in the icy grip of that Pennsylvania winter. Just as hope seemed lost, a new figure would arrive in the snow-covered camp, an unlikely stranger with a mysterious past, whose arrival on February 23, 1778, would begin to turn the tide. But before the forging could begin, the army had to survive the despair. The winter of 1777 to 1778 found the Continental Army at its lowest ebb, not just in terms of physical suffering but also in its very structure and identity. After a series of tactical defeats, notably at Brandywine Creek and Germantown, the British had successfully occupied Philadelphia, the American capital. This forced General Washington and the Continental Congress to flee, with Congress relocating to York, Pennsylvania. Washington's decision to encamp his battered forces at Valley Forge, approximately 18 miles northwest of Philadelphia, was a strategic one. It positioned his army close enough to monitor British movements and prevent them from easily foraging the rich farmlands of Pennsylvania, yet far enough to avoid a surprise attack on his own beleaguered troops. However, the encampment itself revealed profound vulnerabilities within the nascent American military. The Continental Army, largely composed of disparate colonial militias, lacked the fundamental discipline and standardized training essential for professional warfare. Before Valley Forge, there was no uniform drill manual. Regiments often employed their own training methods or none at all. Officers were not accustomed to the rigid hierarchy and immediate obedience demanded in European armies. Each unit often acted as a community that had democratically chosen its leaders, leading to inconsistencies and a general lack of cohesion. This made large-scale maneuvers difficult and unpredictable against the highly trained British regulars. Soldiers were adept at skirmishing and individual marksmanship, honed during frontier conflicts, but they struggled with the synchronized movements required for 18th-century battlefield tactics, such as forming lines quickly or executing bayonet charges effectively. Beyond the immediate tactical shortcomings, the Continental Army's logistical and administrative systems were in disarray. Supply chains were broken, leading directly to the desperate shortages of food, clothing, and medicine that defined the winter. The lack of proper sanitation was horrific. Men relieved themselves where they wished, and animal carcasses were left to rot, contributing significantly to the rampant spread of disease. Many sick and dying soldiers were stripped of their clothing, which was then given to other troops, inadvertently spreading illness further through the camp. Washington himself, in a letter to Henry Lawrence, President of the Continental Congress, warned that unless drastic measures were taken, this army might dissolve. The very concept of a unified professional military force, capable of standing toe-to-toe with the world's most formidable army, seemed a distant dream. It was into this crucible of suffering and disorganization that an unlikely figure would step. Friedrich Wilhelm Rudolf Gerhard August, Freiherr von Steuben, better known to history as Baron von Steuben, was born in Magdeburg, Prussia. In 1730, he embarked on a military career at the young age of 17, joining the Prussian army. He served with distinction throughout the 7 Years' War, a conflict that pitted Prussia and Britain against France, Austria, and Russia. During this time he rose through the ranks, wounded at battles like Prague and Kunersdorf, and eventually served as a staff officer and aide-de-camp to none other than Frederick the Great, one of Europe's most renowned military minds. His experiences under Frederick exposed him to the cutting edge of military organization, staff work, and close-order drill, knowledge virtually unknown to other European armies, let alone the fledgling American forces. However, Steuben's promising career in the Prussian army abruptly ended in 1763, with his discharge as a captain for reasons that remain speculative. For over a decade, he sought new military employment in various European armies, including the British, French, and Austrian, but found no suitable positions. In 1771, he received the title of Baron from the Prince of Hohenzollern-Hechingen, whose court he served as Grand Marshal, an administrative director position. By the mid-1770s, desperate for money and a new opportunity, Steuben traveled to France, hearing tales of the American Revolution and the potential for glory. In Paris, he was introduced to the American ambassadors, Benjamin Franklin and Silas Deane. Recognizing his invaluable Prussian military background, Franklin and Deane presented Steuben to the Continental Congress with an exaggerated letter of introduction, describing him as a lieutenant general in the King of Prussia's service, fired with zeal for our cause. While initially furious at being offered only a volunteer position without guaranteed rank or pay, Steuben, with no other prospects, eventually accepted. Congress arranged for his compensation to be based on the successful outcome of the war and his contributions, and instructed him to report directly to General Washington at Valley Forge. Steuben, accompanied by his Italian greyhound Arthur, an aide-de-camp, and a military secretary, landed in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, on December 1, 1777, and eventually made his way overland to York, Pennsylvania, where he met with Congress in early February 1778. He finally arrived at Valley Forge on February 23, 1778. His arrival made an immediate and striking impression. Dressed in the crisp uniform of a Prussian general, adorned with ribbons and medals, his large, barrel-chested physique exuded a martial presence that one soldier likened to the ancient fabled god of war. A perfect personification of Mars, Washington, though he would later learn of the embellishments to Steuben's rank, was deeply impressed by the baron's sincerity and obvious military expertise. Appointed temporary inspector general, Steuben's mission was to meticulously observe the American soldiers, their equipment, their skills, and their living conditions. What he discovered was a shocking contrast to the highly organized European armies he knew. He described the army he found as one no European army could have held together in such circumstances. The forging of a new army was about to begin. Upon his arrival at Valley Forge, Baron von Steuben confronted a truly dire situation. The American soldiers, though possessing a fierce independent spirit, lacked the foundational discipline and uniform training essential for a professional fighting force. Their regiments drilled using a chaotic mix of British, German, and French methods, if they drilled at all, leaving everything up to individual company commanders. This absence of a standardized system meant that combined maneuvers on the battlefield were nearly impossible, a recipe for disaster in any major engagement. Beyond the inconsistent training, the camp itself was a picture of disorganization and squalor. Poor sanitation, a critical issue for any large encampment, contributed significantly to the spread of disease, with many soldiers simply discarding refuse within their huts. Steuben, accustomed to the meticulously ordered Prussian army, was appalled by the conditions, which he quickly recognized as a major impediment to the army's health and effectiveness. Despite the grim reality, Steuben was remarkably optimistic about the potential of these American citizen soldiers. He discerned that their unique character, unlike that of the conscripted European soldiers he knew, required a different approach. Rather than blind obedience, American soldiers responded to understanding and explanation. Steuben quickly realized that simply barking orders, as he might have in Prussia, would be ineffective. He had to explain the asterisk, why asterisk behind the asterisk, what asterisk. This insight formed the cornerstone of his revolutionary training method. Steuben, though fluent in French and German, knew very little English. This language barrier initially presented a formidable challenge. To overcome it, he worked closely with a team of translators, including his secretary, Duponceau, and two of Washington's trusted aides-de-camp, John Lawrence and Alexander Hamilton. Together, they translated his French instructions into English, ensuring that his commands and lessons were clearly understood by the troops. On March 19, 1778, Steuben began his intensive training program on a field he christened the Grand Parade. He started not with the entire army, but with a small model company of 100 hand-picked soldiers. This strategic decision allowed him to personally demonstrate and refine his methods before propagating them throughout the larger force. These 100 men, in turn, would become the trainers for the rest of the army. Steuben's reforms were comprehensive, focusing on practical skills vital for 18th century combat. He simplified the complex process of firing and reloading muskets, transforming it into a more efficient, almost instinctive procedure. He taught soldiers to march at a precise pace and cadence, enabling them to maintain formation without relying solely on drums. Critically, he instilled the effective use of the bayonet, a weapon often neglected by American troops but crucial for close-quarters fighting. His drills also emphasized speedy maneuvers and the ability to form compact columns for rapid movement, a stark contrast to the unwieldy miles-long lines that often characterized previous American formations. Beyond individual soldier skills, Steuben tackled the broader issues of drill and discipline that were lacking across the army. He observed that different companies used varied training techniques, leading to disarray when units attempted to cooperate. His solution was to introduce one standard method, coordinating the entire Continental Army, officers, who often delegated drilling to sergeants in the British style, were now expected to be intimately involved in the training of their men, fostering a closer bond and ensuring consistent instruction. Steuben, with his unique blend of theatricality and genuine concern, would personally lead drills, often shouting and cursing in a mix of German, French, and his growing English vocabulary, which notably included "goddamn," when exasperated with the troops' errors. His dramatic displays, though sometimes humorous to the onlookers, served to capture attention and emphasize the gravity of his lessons. The Baron's influence extended beyond the parade ground. He introduced fundamental reforms in camp organization, hygiene, and sanitation. He laid out specific guidelines for where livestock should be slaughtered, where tents and huts should be pitched, and crucially, where latrines should be dug, insisting they be on opposite sides of the camp from kitchens and facing downhill to prevent contamination. These seemingly simple measures were revolutionary for the Continental Army, many of whom were accustomed to living amidst their own filth, and directly contributed to a reduction in disease. He also demanded that soldiers take meticulous care of their equipment, ensuring weapons were cleaned and ready for inspection. Washington quickly recognized the transformative power of Steuben's training. Within days of the program's inception, the commander-in-chief saw remarkable progress and ordered all other drills halted until Steuben's methods could be implemented army-wide. The model company rapidly disseminated Steuben's techniques throughout the brigades and regiments, with newly appointed sub-inspectors assisting in the proliferation of the program. By early April, barely a month after the training began, entire regiments were successfully drilling as cohesive units. The intensive training had a profound psychological impact on the beleaguered soldiers. As they mastered the drills and maneuvers, their confidence soared, and morale, which had plummeted during the brutal winter, began to rise dramatically. The Continental Army, once a disparate collection of colonial militias, was steadily evolving into a unified, disciplined, and professional fighting force, ready to stand toe-to-toe with the well-trained British regulars. Steuben's work at Valley Forge culminated in 1779 with the codification of his lessons into a training manual officially titled Regulations for the Order and Discipline of the Troops of the United States, but more commonly known as the Blue Book. This manual, combining Prussian military protocols with adaptations for American conditions, covered everything from speedy maneuvers and effective firepower to infantry formation, record-keeping, and camp organization. It became the standard for the United States Army and state militia forces, guiding American military training all the way through the War of 1812, and some portions of it remain relevant in training manuals today. The ultimate test of Steuben's reforms came shortly after the Army departed Valley Forge. At the Battle of Monmouth in June 1778, the revitalized Continental Army, demonstrating newfound discipline and tactical prowess, held its ground against ferocious British fire and bayonet charges, even forcing the British to retreat. This engagement served as tangible proof of the value of Steuben's intensive training, cementing his legacy as a pivotal figure in forging the American Army into a formidable fighting machine. The Winter of Despair had, against all odds, birthed an army capable of achieving American independence. The impressive stand at Monmouth, while tactically inconclusive, served as a powerful declaration to both adversaries and allies. The Continental Army had not merely survived the Winter of Despair. It had been forged anew, a professional force capable of directly confronting the formidable British regulars. It was tangible proof that Steuben's relentless drills and Washington's unyielding leadership had transformed a ragged collection of militias into a disciplined fighting machine. But even as the American soldiers held their ground against ferocious British fire, an even more profound turning point, born of the same winter, was already taking shape across the Atlantic. While the Continental Army endured unimaginable hardships in the frozen encampment, a different kind of battle was being waged in the opulent salons and diplomatic chambers of Paris. Benjamin Franklin, the venerable American envoy, had tirelessly worked to secure the support of France, Britain's long-standing rival. His popularity and the burgeoning Enlightenment ideals in France helped garner public and aristocratic sympathy for the American cause. The American Declaration of Independence in 1776, followed by the surprising American victory at Saratoga in October 1777, had finally convinced the cautious French foreign minister, Comte de Vergennes, that the American colonies were indeed capable of resisting British rule and worthy of an alliance. On February 6, 1778, amidst the deepest suffering at Valley Forge, A momentous pact was signed in Paris, the Treaty of Alliance between France and the United States. This agreement, a diplomatic triumph, pledged French military and financial support to the fledgling American nation. News of this alliance arriving at Valley Forge in May 1778 ignited a wave of jubilation that swept through the weary camp. Washington, recognizing the profound significance, ordered a grand celebration, complete with military parades and a 13-gun salute, a stark contrast to the grim reality of just weeks prior. The prospect of foreign aid, of a powerful European ally, infused the Continental Army with a renewed sense of purpose and hope. The French alliance irrevocably shifted the global landscape of the war. What had previously been considered a localized colonial rebellion against a powerful empire now exploded into a full-scale international conflict. Great Britain, once focused solely on suppressing its American colonies, suddenly found itself embroiled in a worldwide war, forced to defend its vast empire across multiple theaters from the West Indies to India. This dramatic strategic diversion of British resources was precisely what the Americans desperately needed. Crucially, France brought its formidable naval power to bear, directly challenging Britain's long-held maritime supremacy. The arrival of French fleets and the threat they posed to British shipping and coastal operations would prove invaluable in future campaigns, particularly in preventing British resupply and escape routes. Beyond naval might, France committed substantial financial aid, weapons, equipment, and crucially, thousands of its own seasoned troops. These vital provisions would begin to flow across the Atlantic, alleviating the chronic shortages that had plagued Washington's army throughout the war. And most acutely at Valley Forge, the transformation wrought at Valley Forge had prepared the American army for this pivotal moment. The discipline instilled by Steuben, the resilience honed by suffering, and Washington's unwavering leadership had created an army worthy of an alliance with a major European power. The Continental Army was no longer merely surviving. It was poised to leverage this newfound international support. Figures like the Marquis de Lafayette, the young French nobleman who had endured the winter at Valley Forge alongside his American comrades, epitomized this burgeoning Franco-American bond. Having already proven his dedication, Lafayette would return to France in 1779 to actively advocate for more direct French military intervention, playing a key role in coordinating future combined operations. The British, initially confident in their superior military and naval power, found their strategy shattered. General William Howe, who had spent the winter comfortable in British-occupied Philadelphia while Washington's army suffered just miles away, resigned his command, succeeded by Sir Henry Clinton. The British were forced to abandon Philadelphia shortly after the alliance was formalized, withdrawing towards New York City. Their offensive ambitions were curtailed, replaced by a more defensive posture, stretching their forces thin across a suddenly much wider war. The Winter of Despair, a period that tested the very soul of the American cause, had paradoxically given birth to the means of its salvation. It had not only forged a new army but also secured the essential international support that would ultimately make independence attainable. The road ahead would still be long and arduous, but the alliance with France born from the ashes of Valley Forge had irrevocably tilted the balance, transforming a desperate struggle into a war that America could and ultimately would win. The true climax of the war was now set in motion, a global struggle where the resilience cultivated in the harsh Pennsylvania winter would be matched by the might of a transatlantic partnership. The crucible of Valley Forge had indeed forged a new army, and with the official entry of France into the war, the American cause found renewed vigor and an indispensable ally. News of the Franco-American alliance, finalized in February 1778, reached Washington's camp in May, boosting morale and reaffirming the international recognition of American independence. This diplomatic triumph, coupled with the rigorous training under Baron von Steuben, transformed the Continental Army into a more disciplined and formidable fighting force. The immediate test came swiftly, less than 2 weeks after abandoning Valley Forge. At the Battle of Monmouth in June 1778. At Monmouth, on one of the hottest days of the war, the improved capabilities of Washington's troops were on full display. Though the battle itself was ultimately inconclusive, with both sides claiming victory, the Americans, once prone to disorder, held their ground against the British regulars. It was a powerful demonstration that the Continental Army, revitalized by von Steuben's drills and Washington's unwavering leadership, could now stand toe-to-toe with the world's most professional army. This engagement cemented Washington's authority as commander-in-chief, silencing his detractors. The British, under Sir Henry Clinton, continued their withdrawal towards New York City, largely adopting a more cautious, defensive strategy for the remainder of the conflict in the Northern Theater. The French alliance was not merely symbolic. It provided critically needed military aid, supplies, uniforms, and most importantly troops and naval support. French money and material flowed to the American cause, strengthening a Continental Army that had often been desperately short of resources. Key figures like the Marquis de Lafayette continued to serve with distinction, while the arrival of French expeditionary forces under the Comte de Rochambeau and naval fleets, led by the Comte de Grasse, proved indispensable. France's entry broadened the war into a global struggle, stretching British resources across multiple fronts, from the Caribbean to India, weakening their focus on the American colonies. This transatlantic partnership ultimately culminated in the decisive siege of Yorktown in the autumn of 1781. Washington, in a masterful strategic move, feigned an attack on New York City, then swiftly moved his combined Franco-American forces south to Virginia. There, with the crucial blockade of the Chesapeake Bay by de Grasse's French fleet, General Charles Cornwallis's British army found itself entrapped and cut off from reinforcement or escape. After a relentless 3-week siege, Cornwallis was compelled to surrender on October 19, 1781, effectively ending major military operations in the American Revolution. The victory at Yorktown was a testament to the power of Allied cooperation and the transformation of the Continental Army, a transformation born from the trials of Valley Forge. Valley Forge itself, where no shots were fired and no formal battle took place, became a powerful and enduring symbol in American history. It is the place where the Continental Army, under Washington's leadership, was forged into a professional fighting force. Beyond the suffering and sacrifice, which undeniably occurred, Valley Forge represents resilience, perseverance, and the unwavering resolve of a people determined to be free. Baron von Steuben's Blue Book, a drill manual codified during that winter, became the foundational text for the United States Army, guiding its training and discipline for decades to come, extending its legacy far beyond the war's end. Today, Valley Forge National Historical Park stands as a tangible link to this defining event, preserving the landscapes and stories of those who endured its hardships. It remains a place where generations of Americans come to understand the profound sacrifices made for independence and the birth of a nation. The lessons of Valley Forge's strong leadership, the power of cohesive teams, and the unifying force of a common cause continue to resonate, offering guidance not just for military endeavors, but for any challenge requiring collective resolve. The winter of despair, far from crushing the American spirit, instilled in it an unyielding fortitude. From the frozen fields and makeshift huts of Valley Forge, a new nation's character emerged, hardened by adversity, united by purpose, and ultimately triumphant. It was here, in this quiet Pennsylvania valley, that the means of salvation were truly born, ensuring that America could, and ultimately would win its independence.